My Apache neighbor said she doesn't love you. I asked, then what does love mean? The young man named Daniel had always lived a quiet life near the edge of town. His small house sat just beyond the last row of shops and streets, where the air smelled faintly of pine and dust. Across the dirt road lived the Apache family, a presence he had always respected from a distance. They were quiet people, careful with their words, and full of a calm dignity that Daniel did not fully understand. Yet, something about the old neighbor, Mr. Grey Wolf, always drew him in. The man seemed to know things about life that Daniel could not yet grasp, and Daniel often watched him from his porch, hoping for an insight into a world larger than his own. It had begun that spring when Daniel met Clara. She was new to town, staying with relatives for a few months, but her presence made the small streets feel different. There was a quiet warmth to her smile, a softness in her eyes that invited trust. Daniel found himself thinking of her constantly, imagining conversations that had not happened and moments that were only possible in his mind. He wanted to speak to her, to tell her that he liked her, but every time he tried, the words seemed too simple, too small to express what he felt. He worried he would appear foolish. One afternoon, Daniel decided to visit Mr. Grey Wolf. The old man's house was modest, built from wood that had aged to a silver gray under the sun. A small garden of corn and squash grew in the yard, and chickens moved freely, clucking softly. Daniel walked up the narrow path, feeling both nervous and determined. He had learned over the months that the old man listened differently than others. He did not rush with advice or judgments. Instead, he observed, he waited, and when he spoke, his words carried weight. Daniel knocked on the door. "Hello, Mr. Grey Wolf," he said softly. The old man opened the door, his face lined with years of sun and thought. He nodded in greeting. "Daniel," he said, voice calm, "come in." Daniel stepped inside, the smell of wood smoke and herbs filling the air. He noticed the quiet paintings on the walls, simple depictions of animals and nature. Nothing was flashy, nothing seemed hurried. The room felt still, yet alive. I need advice," Daniel began, sitting on a low wooden chair. He fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. "It's about Clara." Mr. Grey Wolf nodded, listening quietly. His eyes were dark and deep, seeming to see more than Daniel had said. "She doesn't act the way I expect," Daniel continued. "Sometimes she smiles at me, sometimes she doesn't. I feel, unsure. I think I love her, but I don't even know if she cares the same way." The old man was silent for a long moment. Then he said simply, "She doesn't love you." Daniel froze. The words struck him like a sudden wind, sharp and cold. "What?" he whispered. "She doesn't love you, Mr. Adam." Grey Wolf repeated, "Not in the way you hope." Daniel felt a rush of confusion and a bitter taste of hurt. He had built up so many dreams, so many imagined moments, that the thought of her not returning his feelings made his chest tighten. Yet after a moment he forced himself to ask the question that had been forming in his mind. "Then, what does love mean?" The old man leaned back in his chair. His eyes did not waver from Daniel's. "Love," he said slowly, "is not only what you feel in your heart. It is what you do, what you give, what you respect. It is not a promise, it is a truth. But truth does not always follow the heart." Daniel did not fully understand. He had imagined love as something that brought joy, warmth, certainty. He had never thought of it as something that could be present even when it was not returned. "I don't understand," he said, shaking his head. "If she doesn't feel it for me, how is it love at all?" Mr. Grey Wolf smiled faintly, a line that carried both sadness and wisdom. "Love is not always about possession. It is about seeing another person fully, caring for them, even if the world does not give you the same gift in return. Some people think love is a promise or a feeling, but it is more. It is action and respect and patience. Sometimes the heart loves, and the other heart is not ready. That does not make the love false. It only makes it quiet, unseen, or misunderstood." Daniel sat back, overwhelmed by the depth of the words. He had never thought of love in this way. To him, it had always been something warm and simple, something that could be declared with words or gestures. But now he realized that there was a larger, quieter world of feeling and care that he had not noticed. He thought about Clara. Her kindness to the small children she met on the streets, the careful way she spoke to her family, the subtle gestures of care she showed to those around her. He had overlooked these because they were not aimed at him. Perhaps this was what the old man meant. Perhaps love was not always about him. "Does that mean I should stop hoping?" Daniel asked, almost reluctantly. Mr. Grey Wolf shook his head. "No, you should learn to see clearly. to understand what is given freely and what is not, to value the truth more than the wish. If you do not, you will mistake desire for love and lose the chance to learn from both. Life gives lessons, Daniel. Sometimes the hardest ones are about the heart. Daniel felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because he was no longer trapped in confusion. Sadness because the clarity came with a quiet ache in his chest. He wanted to speak, to ask more, but the words seemed unnecessary. The old man had already spoken what needed to be heard. For the next several days, Daniel wandered through his small world with new eyes. He noticed Clara from afar, watching how she laughed with friends, how she helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries, how she smiled at a child chasing a dog. It was small, unnoticed, ordinary, yet it carried a sense of care that words could not describe. He realized that perhaps this was love, the quiet acts that went unseen, the consistent care, the patience that did not demand anything in return. At night, he would sit on his porch thinking of Mr. Grey Wolf's words. He thought of love not as a possession, not as a certainty, but as a recognition, an awareness, a responsibility. And though it hurt that Clara might not feel the same way, he began to feel something new. Respect for her autonomy, gratitude for the lessons he was learning, and the strange comfort of understanding. He remembered the old man saying, "Love is action and respect." And in those quiet moments, Daniel tried to practice it himself. He smiled at Clara when she passed by, greeted her warmly, but he did not ask for anything in return. He noticed the small details in her life, the moments that spoke of her character. In doing so, he felt a calmness he had not known before. The ache of unreturned affection was still there, but it was tempered by a new awareness, a recognition that love was bigger than his own wants. In the following week, Daniel found himself drawn back to Mr. Grey Wolf. He wanted to understand more, to learn how to live with this new understanding. The old man greeted him without question, and they sat together, watching the sun sink behind the hills. "Does it always feel like this?" Daniel asked quietly. "Sometimes," said Mr. Grey Wolf. "The heart wants, and the world does not always give. But that is not failure. That is life. And if you pay attention, you will see that love is always there, in ways you do not expect." Daniel nodded, trying to hold on to the calm in the old man's voice. He did not yet fully understand all the lessons, but he felt the first hint of acceptance. Love was not simple, it was not always returned, but it was present. It was in care, in observation, in action, in truth. And as the stars began to shine over the quiet town and the Apache lands beyond, Daniel felt something new stirring inside him, a willingness to see love clearly, even if it was not for him. He realized that the world was larger than his longing, that the heart could learn, and that life had more lessons to teach. For the first time, he did not feel lost in confusion. He felt attentive, aware, and ready to learn. And in that stillness, he understood, in part, what the old man meant. Love was not about possession, but about seeing, caring, and respecting. The days to come would challenge him further. Clara's presence would continue to stir his heart, and his own feelings would grow and shift in ways he did not yet predict. But in this first part of his journey, Daniel had taken the first step, understanding that love was bigger than desire, more complex than simple feeling, and quietly powerful, even when unspoken. After his first conversation with Mr. Grey Wolf, Daniel began to see the world differently. Each day he paid closer attention to the people around him, noticing details he had overlooked before. Clara, in particular, seemed different now. She had always been kind, but he realized that her kindness extended far beyond what he had imagined. It was not a kindness aimed at him alone, nor was it a show for anyone else. It was quiet, natural, and sincere. One afternoon, Daniel walked through the small park near his house. Clara was there, sitting under the shade of a tall oak tree, reading a book. He watched as she smiled at a little girl who tripped over a root, offering her a hand and helping her stand. The girl giggled and ran off, and Clara returned to her reading without any thought of recognition. Daniel felt a warmth in his chest, not because she had noticed him, but because he could see her caring spirit clearly. He began to observe how she interacted with others. She held doors open for strangers, offered water to a tired dog owner, and spoke softly to an elderly man who had dropped his groceries. These actions were small, but they were consistent. Daniel realized that this might be what Mr. Grey Wolf had meant when he said love is shown through actions. It was not loud or demanding. It was quiet, patient, and genuine. Daniel also noticed differences between Clara's ways and the world he had known. In his life, people often expressed affection with words, gifts, or public gestures. Here it seemed different. Care could be silent, unrecognized, and still powerful. He thought of the Apache community and how Mr. Grey Wolf had lived. There was a quiet strength in the way they treated one another, respect for boundaries, and a focus on actions over declarations. It was a world that demanded attention and understanding rather than simple observation. One evening, Daniel returned home and sat on his porch reflecting on the day. He thought about Clara's small gestures and the lessons he was learning. His feelings for her had not changed, but something about the way he viewed them had shifted. He no longer expected immediate return or recognition. He began to understand that caring deeply for someone did not always require that they feel the same way at the same time. The next morning, Daniel visited Mr. Grey Wolf again. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, to clarify the lessons he was trying to understand. The old man greeted him warmly, motioning for him to sit by the small wooden table near the window. The sunlight spilled across the room, highlighting the lines in Mr. Grey Wolf's face and the gentle sway of the plants in the garden outside. "Daniel," the old man said, "you are learning to see, and that is good. But understanding is more than seeing. You must also feel in quiet ways and accept what is given without expectation." Daniel nodded. "I see her differently now. I notice how she cares for others, but I still don't know what she feels for me." "That is not for you to demand," Mr. Grey Wolf replied. "To love someone is to see them fully, whether or not they return it. Love is not a contract. It is an observation, an action, a truth. Sometimes the truth is not easy to accept, but it is always worth learning." Daniel reflected on the words. He realized that he had been so focused on what he wanted from Clara that he had missed what she was already offering the world. He began to understand that love could be present even when it was not aimed directly at him. Over the next week, Daniel began to take small steps. He greeted Clara warmly when he passed her, offering a smile without expecting one back. He noticed the way she laughed with friends, the way she listened to their stories, the way she offered help without hesitation. Each observation made him more aware of the depth of her character and the quiet strength of her spirit. He also began to notice his own reactions. Sometimes he felt a sting of jealousy or longing, wishing she would look at him in a particular way. But he reminded himself of Mr. Grey Wolf's words. Love was not about possession. It was about recognition, respect, and patience. By practicing this, Daniel felt a new kind of calmness. He was learning to separate desire from understanding, to see clearly without being overwhelmed by emotion. One afternoon, Daniel walked along the edge of the Apache lands. He watched the families there as they moved through their day. Children played quietly, elders tended gardens, and people spoke with care and attention. He noticed the way the community worked together, how respect and love were shown through responsibility and care rather than words. He thought about Mr. Grey Wolf and the lessons he had shared. There was a quiet dignity here, a patient understanding of life and relationships that Daniel had not experienced before. Daniel began to see parallels between the Apache way and Clara's actions. Both showed love through care, attention, and respect. Both valued authenticity over performance, truth over expectation. This realization gave him a sense of clarity he had not felt before. He understood that love could be subtle, quiet, and indirect, but no less real for its silence. That evening, Daniel returned home and wrote in his journal. He described Clara's actions, the lessons from Mr. Grey Wolf, and his own feelings. Writing helped him organize his thoughts and recognize patterns he had overlooked. He wrote about the small gestures that spoke of love, the way she paused to help someone, the way she listened attentively, the way she treated others with respect. These were all forms of love he had not understood before. Over the next few days, Daniel began to experiment with his own actions. He tried to show care without expectation. He offered help to neighbors, listened attentively to friends, and practiced patience with those around him. Each act, though small, felt meaningful. He realized that love was not only about what others gave him, but also about what he gave freely. One afternoon, Clara approached him while he was watering a small patch of flowers near his porch. She smiled softly, thanking him for the attention to the garden. They spoke briefly about the weather and the town, but Daniel noticed the subtle warmth in her voice. It was not a declaration of love, but it was a gesture of kindness and acknowledgement. Daniel appreciated it fully, understanding that love could be present even in small, ordinary moments. That evening he returned to Mr. Grey Wolf to share his observations. "I think I am beginning to understand," Daniel said. "I see her care for others, and I see how she acts. I don't know if she feels the same way, but I can recognize love in her actions." Mr. Grey Wolf nodded. "Yes, That is the beginning. Understanding comes before expectation. When you see clearly, you learn not only about others, but also about yourself. You learn patience, humility, and truth. Daniel felt a sense of peace he had not known before. The ache in his heart had not disappeared, but it had softened. He realized that love was not a prize to be won or a feeling to demand. It was an experience to observe, a lesson to learn, and a responsibility to practice. As the days passed, Daniel continued to watch, listen, and reflect. He saw Clara's small acts of care, he observed the quiet strength of the Apache community, and he practiced patience with himself and others. Each moment added to his understanding. Love was not simple, but it was present everywhere, if only one took the time to see it. Daniel also began to notice his own growth. He was less impatient, more observant, and more aware of the needs and feelings of others. He realized that understanding love required attention, humility, and an openness to experience life fully. It was not something that could be forced or rushed. It was quiet, patient, and often invisible. By the end of this week, Daniel had begun to experience a transformation. His feelings for Clara remained, but they had matured. He no longer wished to possess her heart, but rather to appreciate it as it was. He understood that love could exist without possession, without expectation, and without immediate return. It could be seen, respected, and honored quietly. And so, Daniel continued his days, learning from Clara, from Mr. Grey Wolf, and from the world around him. He watched, he listened, and he acted with care. Each small gesture, each quiet observation was a step toward understanding a love that was larger than himself, richer than simple desire, and deeper than any words could express. In this part of his journey, Daniel had learned that love was not a simple feeling, but a way of seeing and living. It required attention, patience, and humility. It was found in quiet actions, in respect for others, and in care that was freely given. And though he did not yet know what the future held with Clara, he was learning to experience love fully, without expectation, and with a heart that was open and aware. Daniel had spent weeks observing Clara and reflecting on what Mr. Grey Wolf had taught him. His understanding of love had grown, but it was not without struggle. Some days he still felt the sting of longing, the ache of uncertainty. Clara's kindness to others sometimes made him question her feelings, and he struggled to balance his hope with the lessons he was learning. One morning, he saw Clara walking along the main street carrying a basket of vegetables for her family. She smiled at him briefly, a polite nod, and continued on her way. Daniel felt a pang of disappointment. He had hoped for more, something that might signal affection, yet he reminded himself to observe, not demand. Still, the heart is stubborn, and it does not always follow reason. That evening, Daniel decided to speak to her directly. He walked to her home, carrying a small gift of freshly baked bread, a simple gesture, but one he hoped might express his care. Clara greeted him politely, her eyes soft but unreadable. "Hello, Daniel," she said. "It's good to see you." He offered the bread, trying to smile, though nerves fluttered in his stomach. "I thought you might like this," he said. "I baked it this morning." Clara accepted it gently. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." They sat on the porch for a few minutes, speaking about the town, the weather, and small daily events. Daniel tried to read her expressions to catch a hint of feeling, but Clara's demeanor remained calm and reserved. She did not reveal much about her thoughts or emotions. Daniel felt both frustration and admiration. She was honest in her own way, and he respected that, even as his heart longed for more. The next day, a misunderstanding occurred that shook him. He had noticed Clara speaking closely with another young man from town. They laughed together, and Daniel, unsure of their relationship, felt a surge of jealousy. He misinterpreted the laughter and closeness as a sign that she preferred someone else. His thoughts spun quickly, and he felt a mix of anger, fear, and sadness. Unable to bear the uncertainty, Daniel confronted Clara the following afternoon. "Why were you with him yesterday?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm but failing. "Are you interested in him instead of me?" Clara looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. She shook her head slowly. "Daniel, that's not what you think," she said gently. "We were talking about school and town matters. There is nothing more to it. I care for my friends, but that does not mean anything beyond that." Daniel's chest tightened. He felt both relief and embarrassment. Relief that he had misunderstood, and embarrassment at his own assumptions. He realized that he had allowed desire and expectation to cloud his perception. Clara's patience and calmness were quiet lessons in themselves. Later that day, Daniel walked toward Mr. Grey Wolf's house. He needed guidance. He wanted to understand how to manage these feelings without letting them disrupt his observations and care. The old man greeted him as usual, a calm presence in a world that often felt chaotic. I made a mistake, Daniel admitted. I misunderstood Clara. I let my feelings take control, and it caused tension. I don't know how to manage these emotions properly. Mr. Greywolf nodded, listening carefully. Emotions are strong, Daniel. The heart is often louder than reason. But notice this. Misunderstandings teach more than smooth experiences ever will. When the heart falters, the mind must observe, reflect, and learn. You are learning the hard way, but learning nonetheless. Daniel thought about those words. He realized that love was not only about recognizing care in others, but also about managing one's own expectations and emotions. It was about observing without judgment, acting with patience, and maintaining respect even when the heart felt pain. Over the next several days, Daniel practiced this awareness. He observed Clara without expecting anything in return. He noticed how she helped her younger cousins, how she assisted neighbors with errands, and how she treated everyone with fairness and patience. Each observation deepened his understanding of love as something quiet, consistent, and unselfish. One afternoon, while walking near the river, Daniel saw Clara helping a child who had dropped his toy into the water. She carefully retrieved the toy, handed it back to him with a smile, and then continued on her way without any fanfare. Daniel watched her and realized that these small acts were expressions of love in their purest form. Actions done freely, without expectation of recognition or reward. Yet, Daniel also recognized his own growth. When he saw her helping the child, he no longer felt jealousy or longing. Instead, he felt admiration and respect. He was learning to separate desire from appreciation, to see love in action without needing it to be directed at him. This was a difficult lesson, but he could feel it taking root in his heart.
That evening, he returned to Mr. Greywolf once more.
I see her differently now, he said. I understand more about what love can be, but it still hurts. I want to care without wanting in return, but my heart struggles. Mr. Greywolf leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. The heart will always struggle, Daniel. That is its nature. But the mind can guide it. Observe, reflect, act, and respect. Learn patience, and you will find peace. Understanding love is a journey, not a destination. Daniel thought about this deeply. He realized that he had been approaching love like a goal to achieve, rather than a truth to recognize. By changing his perspective, he began to experience love differently, not as a prize, but as a living presence in the world around him. Days turned into weeks. Daniel continued to observe, act with kindness, and reflect on his feelings. He saw Clara in new ways each day, noticing details that he had missed before. The gentle way she spoke to her aunt, the careful steps she took when crossing uneven ground, the quiet attention she gave to people in need. Each observation was a lesson in patience, respect, and understanding. At the same time, he learned more about himself. He realized that love was not only about noticing others, but also about practicing care and integrity in his own actions. He helped neighbors without expectation, listened to friends attentively, and took time to reflect on his emotions. These small practices strengthened his understanding of love and deepened his emotional maturity. One evening, Clara invited Daniel to help with preparations for a small-town festival. They worked together setting up tables, arranging decorations, and helping children learn games. Daniel noticed how naturally she guided others, how she remained calm even when things went wrong, and how she valued everyone's contributions. He admired her patience and leadership, realizing that love could be expressed through guidance, care, and support, not only through personal affection. By the end of the festival, Daniel felt a quiet satisfaction. He had not received declaration of love, nor had he demanded one. Yet he felt connected to Clara in a deeper way, through observation, understanding, and shared effort. He realized that love was a living thing, present in actions, patience, and respect, rather than in words or gestures alone. Daniel also began to notice the subtle signs of Clara's own struggles. She was kind, but she had her own worries and concerns. She carried herself with care, but there were moments of hesitation and thoughtfulness that suggested she was cautious with her feelings. Daniel recognized that understanding love also meant acknowledging the other person's perspective, respecting boundaries, and allowing space for their emotions. One day, as they walked along a quiet street together, Daniel felt a sense of clarity. He did not need Clara to declare love for him to recognize its presence. He could see it in her actions, in her care for others, and in the way she respected and valued life around her. Love, he realized, was not ownership. It was recognition and respect. That evening he returned home and wrote in his journal, reflecting on the past weeks. He described the misunderstandings, the lessons, and the growth he had experienced. He wrote about Clara's small gestures, the guidance of Mr. Grey Wolf, and the insights he had gained from observing both. Each word reinforced the truth that love was patient, quiet, and often invisible, but no less powerful for its subtlety. By the time Part 3 drew to a close, Daniel had learned an essential truth. Love could be misunderstood, tested, and even painful, but it was always a teacher. The heart would falter, the mind would question, and emotions would surge, yet through patience, reflection, and observation, one could learn to understand love more deeply. He realized that this journey was ongoing and that each day offered new lessons and opportunities for growth. Daniel's path was not simple. There were still moments of confusion, longing, and doubt. Yet he now faced them with awareness, humility, and a willingness to learn. He no longer sought love as a possession, but as a truth to recognize, respect, and honor. And as he lay in bed that night thinking of Clara and the lessons of Mr. Grey Wolf, he felt a quiet confidence. Love was not only what one feels, but what one sees, what one gives, and what one allows to exist in its own way. The weeks that followed brought a quiet transformation in Daniel. He no longer chased Clara's attention with anxious hope or desperate longing. Instead, he observed, reflected, and appreciated the small truths in her actions and in life itself. Every encounter with her, no matter how ordinary, became a lesson. He noticed the way she treated her younger cousins with gentle patience, the way she spoke respectfully to her elders, and the way she offered help without expecting praise. Each small act taught him about the subtleties of love, patience, and respect. Daniel also reflected on his own behavior. He remembered the moments of jealousy, the misunderstandings, and the times he had let his heart take control over his mind. He realized that love was not simply about feeling. It was about learning, growing, and acting with care and integrity. Observing Clara had shown him that love was active, not passive. It existed in how one treated others, not merely in how one wished to be treated. One afternoon, Daniel visited Mr. Grey Wolf again. The old man was tending his garden, carefully trimming the leaves of the squash plants and adjusting the small wooden markers that labeled each row. Daniel watched quietly, appreciating the calm, methodical way Mr. Grey Wolf worked. "You have been quiet these days," Mr. Grey Wolf said without looking up. "I've been observing," Daniel replied, "and reflecting. I think I understand more about what love is, but I'm not sure if I truly understand it yet." Mr. Grey Wolf paused, letting the words hang in the warm air. "Understanding is a journey, not a destination. You may never fully grasp it, but you can live it. Live it through patience, respect, and care. Notice what is given freely, and do not cling to what is withheld. That is the beginning of wisdom." Daniel nodded. He realized that love was not a prize to be won, nor a feeling to demand. It was an experience to observe and practice. Each day offered a new opportunity to see love in its many forms, whether in Clara's small gestures, the kindness of neighbors, or the quiet routines of Mr. Grey Wolf's household. Over the next few days, Daniel began to put this understanding into practice. When he saw Clara struggling to carry a basket of food from the market, he offered his help without expecting gratitude or recognition. When a child dropped a toy in the street, he bent down to retrieve it and returned it quietly, simply noticing the child's smile as reward enough. These small acts reinforced the lessons he had learned about love, that it existed in giving freely, in patience, and in respect. Daniel also reflected on his own heart. He had once thought love was a feeling of longing and desire, centered entirely on the person he cared for. Now, he understood it as something larger and more expansive. Love was about noticing and appreciating others, about caring without expectation, and about accepting life as it was. He realized that even if Clara never returned his romantic feelings, he could still experience love fully through understanding and action. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Daniel saw Clara sitting by the riverbank. She was sketching in a notebook, her pencil moving carefully across the paper. Daniel walked slowly toward her, observing without disturbing. He noticed the concentration on her face, the gentle movement of her hand, and the quiet focus she brought to her task. It was not a dramatic display, but it was a reflection of her care and attention, the qualities he had come to value deeply. He sat a few feet away, content to watch her from a distance. He realized that love did not require constant interaction or affirmation. Sometimes it was enough to simply see and appreciate the other person fully. The moments of quiet observation became acts of love themselves, and Daniel felt a sense of peace he had never known before. As days passed, Daniel noticed small signs of growth in Clara as well. She was kind, attentive, and thoughtful, yet she had her own moments of hesitation and introspection. He recognized that understanding love also meant respecting the other person's pace and feelings. He could not demand affection, nor could he rush her heart. He could only observe, act with care, and accept her as she was. One afternoon, while walking through the small town square, Daniel saw Clara helping an elderly woman gather fallen groceries. Daniel offered to assist, and together they returned the items to the woman's home. The simple act of collaboration and shared care reminded Daniel of the lessons he had learned from Mr. Grey Wolf. Love was found in cooperation, kindness, and attention to the needs of others. It was not about declaration or possession, but about action and respect. That evening, Daniel reflected on his journey so far. He remembered the moments of misunderstanding, the pangs of longing, and the lessons he had learned from observing Clara and from Mr. Grey Wolf's guidance. I would be so happy. He realized that growth in love required patience, humility, and a willingness to accept what could not be controlled. By practicing these qualities, he was becoming more aware, compassionate, and capable of experiencing love fully. He also noticed a change within himself. He was less anxious, more observant, and more attuned to the quiet details of life. The small acts of care, whether from Clara or from himself, became meaningful expressions of love that did not depend on recognition or return. He was learning to find joy in understanding and practicing love, rather than in expecting it to be returned exactly as he wished. One evening, Daniel visited Mr. Grey Wolf once more. "I think I understand now," he said softly. "Love is not about getting. It is about seeing, caring, and respecting. It is not about possession, but about understanding and action." Mr. Grey Wolf smiled, his eyes reflecting years of wisdom. "Yes, you are learning, and the heart will continue to teach you. There will still be challenges, but you are learning to face them with patience and clarity. That is the true journey." Daniel felt a deep sense of calm. He realized that love was not a single feeling or moment, but a practice that could be experienced every day. It was found in kindness, patience, observation, and respect. He could see it in Clara's actions, in the Apache community, and in his own small gestures. Love was not confined to romance. It was present in life itself. Over the next few weeks, Daniel continued to live with this awareness. He observed Clara, helped neighbors, and practiced patience in his own heart. Each day reinforced the lessons he had learned, that love was quiet, persistent, and often unseen, yet always present. He no longer measured his happiness by Clara's affection alone. Instead, he found contentment in understanding, appreciation, and the small acts of care that connected him to others. One afternoon, while sitting by the river with Clara, Daniel realized something profound. He did not need a declaration of love to appreciate her fully. He could see it in her actions, respect it, and allow it to exist naturally. Love, he understood, was not about control or expectation, but about recognition, acceptance, and care. As the sun set behind the hills, Daniel felt a sense of completeness he had not known before. He understood that love was a journey, not a destination. It required patience, observation, reflection, and humility. It was found in the small, quiet actions of everyday life, in the respect for others' hearts, and in the willingness to act with care without expectation. In this part of his journey, Daniel had grown deeply. He had faced misunderstandings, jealousy, and longing. He had observed Clara's actions and learned from Mr. Grey Wolf's wisdom. He had practiced patience, respect, and care, and he had discovered that love was not a possession, but a living truth that could be recognized, honored, and experienced fully. By the end of this period, Daniel was ready to face the final lessons of his journey. He was prepared to accept the realities of his feelings, Clara's heart, and the lessons of life itself. He had learned that love was larger than desire, more enduring than expectation, and present in ways that could be quiet, subtle, and deeply meaningful. Daniel had spent months learning about love, patience, and understanding. Each day had taught him something new, that love was not just a feeling, but a way of seeing, caring, and acting. He had learned to observe Clara without expectation, to notice her actions and kindness, and to respect her heart, even when it was not his to claim. Yet he knew that the final lesson, the deepest understanding, was still ahead. One morning, Daniel awoke with a quiet sense of determination. He had come to accept that love could exist without reciprocation, and that his feelings did not require a response to be valid. But he wanted clarity, not for control or desire, but for understanding and peace. He decided to speak to Clara honestly, without expectation, to acknowledge both his feelings and the respect he had for her. He found her sitting by the river, sketching in her notebook as usual. The sunlight reflected off the water, casting gentle patterns across her face. Daniel approached slowly, his steps measured and calm. She looked up and smiled softly, welcoming him without question. "Clara," he began, "I want to speak honestly. I care for you deeply, and my heart has wished for more than what may be possible. But I also respect you and what you feel. I do not wish to demand anything, only to acknowledge what I feel and to respect your heart." Clara listened quietly, her eyes reflecting both surprise and understanding. She closed her notebook gently and set it aside. "Daniel," she said softly, "I care for you as a friend, and I value your kindness and honesty. I do not feel the same way you do, but I appreciate that you have respected my feelings and acted with care. That is rare, and it matters more than words." Daniel felt a mixture of relief and calm. Relief that the truth was clear, and calm because he had faced it without fear or desperation. He realized that love was not about possession or desire, but about acknowledgement, respect, and understanding. The feelings he had for Clara were real, but they did not need to change her heart for them to have meaning. Over the next days, Daniel reflected on this conversation. He thought of Mr. Greywolf's words, of the quiet lessons in Clara's actions, and of his own growth. He realized that he had moved from longing and confusion to understanding and acceptance. Love, he saw, was not a prize or a goal. It was a living truth to be experienced, respected, and honored. He began to notice the many forms of love in the world around him. In the Apache community, elders cared for children with patience and attention. Neighbors helped one another without expectation of reward. Clara's own actions demonstrated care and consideration that were quiet but powerful. Daniel saw that love existed everywhere, in ordinary acts and unnoticed gestures, and that it could be recognized and appreciated without ownership. Daniel also reflected on his own role in this journey. He realized that love required self-awareness, humility, and patience. It was not enough to feel; he had to act with care, respect, boundaries, and allow others to be themselves. By doing so, he had grown as a person, learning not only about love for others, but also about love for himself, the ability to recognize his feelings without letting them control him. One afternoon, Daniel walked along the edge of town, watching children play and neighbors interact. He noticed a mother helping her child tie a shoelace, a young man carrying groceries for an elderly neighbor, and a teacher speaking kindly to students struggling with a lesson. Each small act reminded him that love was active, patient, and often quiet. It was not always declared, but it was always present. He thought of Clara and smiled softly. He no longer needed her love to validate his own feelings. Instead, he felt gratitude for having known her, for the lessons she had unknowingly taught him through her actions, and for the wisdom he had gained from Mr. Greywolf. Love, he realized, was about appreciation, understanding, and living with a heart that could see beauty in others without needing possession. That evening, Daniel visited Mr. Greywolf one last time before the season changed. The old man was sitting on his porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Daniel joined him quietly, taking a seat and letting the warmth of the day settle around them. "I understand now," Daniel said softly. "Love is not about wanting. It is about seeing, respecting, and caring. It is present even when it is not returned in the way we hope. It is quiet, patient, and true." Mr. Greywolf smiled, his eyes reflecting years of experience. "Yes, Daniel, you have learned well. The heart will always feel, but understanding allows you to live fully. You see that love exists in action, patience and respect. That understanding is more valuable than any declaration." Daniel nodded, feeling a deep sense of calm. He realized that he could love Clara, the world, and life itself without needing them to be the same for him. Love was not a transaction, but a truth to be lived and experienced. Over the next weeks, Daniel continued to live with this awareness. He greeted Clara warmly, shared conversations with friends, and offered help to those in need. Each act was a reflection of the lessons he had learned, that love was about observation, care, and respect. He found joy in these actions, not in expectation of reward, but in the simple presence of kindness and connection. Daniel also noticed a subtle shift in his own heart. He could see Clara's kindness clearly, honor it, and feel gratitude without needing anything in return. The heart, he realized, could hold affection and respect simultaneously, without confusion or conflict. One afternoon, as Daniel and Clara walked through the small park, he observed the children playing and the families enjoying the day. He reflected on the journey he had taken, the misunderstandings, the lessons from Mr. Grey Wolf, and the quiet growth he had experienced. He understood now that love was not about outcomes, but about presence, understanding, and action. Clara spoke softly about her sketches, her plans for the town festival, and the small joys she had noticed in the world. Daniel listened attentively, appreciating her observations and thoughts. He realized that listening, observing, and acknowledging others' experiences were also forms of love, acts of care that required attention and presence. As the sun began to set, Daniel felt a sense of closure and peace. He had learned the hardest lessons: to observe without demanding, to care without expecting, and to understand that love existed even when it was quiet or unreturned. He felt gratitude for the journey, for Clara's presence, and for the wisdom of Mr. Grey Wolf. That night, Daniel wrote in his journal one final time. He recorded his reflections, the lessons he had learned, and the quiet truths he had discovered about love. He wrote about patience, observation, respect, and care. He wrote about understanding that love was not possession, but recognition and acknowledgement. And he wrote about the peace he now felt, knowing that he could experience love fully without needing it to belong to him. In the days that followed, Daniel continued his life with a calm heart. He greeted neighbors, helped where he could, and observed the small acts of kindness in the world. He saw love everywhere, in actions, gestures, and quiet care. He understood that it was not always dramatic or declared, but it was always present, waiting to be noticed and appreciated. And as he walked past Clara one afternoon, he smiled softly. She smiled back, and in that simple exchange, he felt the culmination of his journey. He had learned that love was not about what he received, but about what he recognized and how he lived it. He could love without expectation, respect without hesitation, and observe without judgment. And in that understanding, he found freedom, peace, and a deep connection to life itself. Daniel knew that his journey with love was not over. Life would continue to teach him, and new experiences would challenge him, but he was ready. He understood that love was not a destination, but a journey, one that required patience, care, and awareness. And he was prepared to live it fully, quietly, and with a heart open to the world. As the stars began to shine over the small town and the Apache lands beyond, Daniel felt a quiet gratitude. He had learned the meaning of love, not as desire or possession, but as action, respect, and understanding. He had seen it in Clara, in the community, and within himself. And he knew that this understanding would guide him for the rest of his life.